Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're doing well, and it's not too dark in my room today. Uh, Traditionally, I like to talk about the weather, so I will continue to do so. It's very grey outside today, no rain, but very grey. Morale not impacted yet, of course, because it's only been a day. Yeah, anyway, I was chatting to my girlfriend earlier on, and she suggested. I asked her, are there like things that she would like me to talk about? Would you have suggestions for topics, to make videos on? And she suggested something cool. I should say that I often consult her, and she gives me lots of ideas. So fair play to her for that. So she said, she was the one who first suggested to me doing a video on anxiety, and she has inspired me many times before. But earlier on, she told me, she asked me, well, she didn't ask me, she suggested to me that I could make a video on assertiveness. How to be assertive when you're a feeler, perhaps more specifically when you're of the INFJ type. But perhaps in general when you're a feeler also. Because she considers me to be a very assertive kind of INFJ, and it's true that I tend to be seen, I think, by people who know me well as relatively strong-willed and assertive. I don't let myself be stomped on. And it seems to me that a lot of INFJs struggle with asserting themselves, at least for a certain period of time, and that definitely was my case. Maybe it's also part to being older, but there is a certain gentleness and a certain tendency towards being very empathetic in INFJs that sometimes clashes with the need for assertiveness, and that's quite interesting to me, because I do think that I'm quite assertive, and maybe it would be interesting for me to look into the origins of that, to try to figure out where it comes from. You'll notice a few things, just as evidence of what I'm saying. Not that I need to provide evidence necessarily, but just to provide an illustration. If you watch my videos with my brother, you'll notice that he mentions that we both have what he calls egos, strong personalities. He's an INFP himself, and he has a strong personality as well. And when in my videos with my parents, when I ask my parents, in what ways are we different? My mom said that I'm more organized and more authoritative than herself, which she's not very authoritative. So I guess it's not hard, and I don't mean this as a jibe or anything. Of course, she has marvelous qualities, but I wouldn't say that authoritativeness is one of them. My dad definitely more so. In my family, my dad is the most assertive person there, ENFJ. There's no doubt about it. But I think in some ways I am more assertive than my brother. So maybe I will dig into those topics a little bit first, and then try to see if I can come up with insights regarding the INFJ type at large a little bit more, and how to develop that sense of assertiveness. Because I would say that in the realm of the things that are available for me to work on, to sort of be happier in life, be more balanced. There are things like being more patient in certain circumstances, working on my anxiety levels, working on a lot of things. But I would say that among these different things, assertiveness, asserting oneself, would not be one of them. Definitely not a priority compared to the other things. It seems that for INFJs, assertiveness would be one of them. So perhaps digging into my own point of view, my own history of how this sense of assertiveness developed would be interesting, and perhaps encouraging, or at least providing information to other INFJs and other feelers, and even thinkers, or anyone who experience a certain sense of struggle or difficulty sometimes with self-assertion in a way that can be seen as a little bit, how to put this, a little bit problematic for one's life, that in a way that impedes one's sense of happiness maybe, or contentment, because one needs to be a little bit assertive, that's for sure. I mean, you may not need to be the most assertive person ever, because that can, if that's quite extreme, that can often turn into something like rudeness or not respecting other people's boundaries or lack of manners. I mean, these things exist. I think that when one cultivates a certain form of assertiveness, one has to always be careful to make sure that this assertiveness does not cause disarray in the hearts of other people. So where does my sense of assertiveness come from? How does it manifest itself? And how can I make sense of it in MBTI terms? Those are really good questions. So perhaps the first thing that I'm going to talk about is how does it manifest? Then where do I think it comes from? And then I will try to contextualize it within a larger INFJ/feeler/ any person, any type context. So how does it manifest itself? Well, my assertiveness, I would say, manifests itself in a bunch of different ways. I think that when I write, when I express myself, I come across as someone who is quite confident in what he's saying, even in the sometimes the uncertainties I have about certain topics, even in my lack of expertise on certain things. I'm also, I guess, confidence when it comes to making fun of myself, or just kind of self-awareness, apologizing very easily, not really dwelling on that, which is, it's not directly connected, well, it's not directly a self-assertiveness, but it is connected with it. It's all tied to a certain confidence about oneself, I think, and the self-acceptance, a form of self-acceptance that is not, as far as I'm concerned, complete, but there is a certain essence that's there and that I'm aware of and that I very much treasure. I would say that the way in which it manifests itself is that when I'm talking to someone, I just have a very clear sense of what I'm saying, where I'm coming from, and that my perspective has some worth. I do not need to embrace everything that somebody says, and I do not need to say that I agree with what somebody says, and if I disagree, I will just disagree, and there's no problem with that. I'll always express it. When I think that someone is behaving unfairly, and that can be a hierarchical superior or anyone, I tend to confront them straight away in a calm fashion, and I answer them in most of my positions, professionally speaking. Whenever there's been an issue like this, I have spoken up quite straight away. And it's really interesting to see how people really change and calm down, and sometimes they even become a little bit not scared of you, but they become almost subservient to you, which I don't like either. My point is not to try to intimidate other people, but to say, okay, like, this is what I believe I am entitled to, respects, my own opinion, my own position. If you don't do that, I'm going to let you know. And I'm capable of doing these things without thinking twice, really. And I think that that's really how it manifests itself. Where does it come from? I think here maybe it comes from a few things. But because I could say, well, the most assertive person in my family is my dad, and it's quite possible that I took inspiration from my dad, because when I was younger, although dealing with my dad was not always easy because he has quite a bit of a temper, he definitely was always very useful to me at certain junctures in my life. Whenever I had to make certain choices in life, he was always the first to support me. Like, the first thing that I had to do, which I experienced as something kind of significant, momentous at my own small level, was my last year of high school. I was going to a kind of, well, it was not kind of, it was a private school in Marseille. I do not actually hail from Marseille itself. I hail from just outside Marseille, and it's just outside. It's still like a half an hour train ride. So you can imagine, as a kid, having to travel half an hour there and back is an hour at least, plus a car drive to the station back from my parents. It's a long time, knowing that they were schools closer to my home, but supposedly not as good, even though they were good, but they were not as good as the one I was sent to, that was Catholic, which I don't think I would have minded so much, but if it wasn't so conservative, which is often linked, I guess, but often linked. So it was very conservative, retrograde, I would say retrograde, and I felt like my freedom was inhibited. I showed up with piercings one day, and I was told straight away that I had to get rid of them. That was just not going to happen, and I was like, who are you to tell me this? So in a sense, my stance as someone who was making his own decisions was already germinating at that time. But the fact that whenever I called my dad thinking he'd be mad, and he was literally like, fuck them. Forgive the swear. And he's like, just go somewhere else. I know you'll do super well in your last year. You're a great pupil, and you'll do well. So go closer to where you live. Just make sure that their average results at the A levels are good and are decent, and actually I did. I went to another school, and I didn't know anybody there, but people would know me quickly. I would sort of be someone who's known, as a certain kind of personality, I guess. I've always had a certain effect on people. I don't think that's, I think that would be kind of true, I would say. And I say this without any hint of, arrogance or anything. I say a certain effect. I'm not saying the apex of charisma or anything, but just as someone who is not necessarily confident in every way. I was definitely not confident with girls at that time and other things, and I was very shy in many ways. But I felt like I had a calling. I felt like I had a calling, and this perhaps brings me to the INFJ thing, because I'm wondering these days whether it is not linked to the INFJ type, because this sense of calling that I had even then, I have more than ever now. But I feel like now I'm able to put it to better use than I used to. I think that at the time I was doing it mostly negatively, by resisting to things that I didn't want, rather than by affirming the things that I wanted. And perhaps that's connected with the fact that when I was younger, I was relying too much on NI and TI as a way also as a crutch for my insecurities on many levels. As a young angsty teen, and then, a bit more recently, I've learned to channel FE again, and I realized that I can actually use it quite well, and of course, for the furtherance of a particular kind of vision, FE is great. FE actually facilitates that even more, and what's even better is that people are going to be on board with it. Not necessarily everyone, but most people are going to be on board with it. And so, of late, when I've been trying to promote my vision online and on forums and everything, people usually are very happy for me and they appreciate it, and that kind of comforts me in this sense of, I would say, a healthy self-worth. Of course, you always have people. There are some people on YouTube, there are some people on forums, there are some people in real life that are annoyed. They're annoyed by those who make them feel insecure, I think, a little, in a sense. And I think that INFJs are likely to experience that a little bit. INFJs who are very balanced, very healthy, or relatively balanced, relatively healthy. As far as I'm concerned, I would consider myself to be relatively balanced at this point. Not very, but relatively. INFJs who are doing well, they radiate a certain form of positivity. They tend to have a bit of FE-related charisma, but at the same time, they can never divest themselves of this sensitivity. There are going to be peculiar types of praise to people who do not have the same kind of charisma, who do not have the same kind of positive aura and depth, but who are still able to get to grasp it as what they do not have, and sort of envy it, but also resent the person for having it. And I think that seeing that the INFJ in this instance still has that weakness that has to do with their great sensitivity and empathy, and altruism, and questioning, self-questioning, because the vision always consists in a coextensive self-questioning. I'm going to return to this. They see this weakness and they strike it. And INFJs, I think that's why it's difficult for us to be leaders other than diplomatic, spiritual, philosophical, or political / symbolic. You know, if you look at the leaders in world history, great INFJ leaders, I know that there are some debates on whether these are leaders or not. But you have Martin Luther King, Jesus, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, and other ones. Notice that none of these leaders were completely political. I mean, you could say Mandela was a political leader, you could say that it's for sure, but there's a sense in which he went beyond with the symbolism of his actions. He represented something that went beyond it. And of course, same for Jesus, same for Luther King, same for Gandhi. Always political dimensions, but not necessarily through a political prism. And I think that's generally because an INFJ is going to derive assertiveness from the strength of their vision, which requires the need to develop and cultivate that vision, own that vision for themselves, know what they want to do with life. Because what do I mean by vision? I mean, how do they see life, and how do they want to make the best out of the life that they see as something that's have a sort of project, a life project, but not just a life project in the sense of, in a sense in which people here at least understand it, which is usually have a family, have a good job, have good activities, and make sure that your children are happy if you have children, which is great. But I think a lot of INFJs are going to have a life project that goes beyond it, towards trying to realize a vision that transcends these things, the transcendental life projects, a contemplation of the transcendental, which I think is linked to NI. I think for some INFJs, that contemplation of the transcendental is going to remain dormant in their NI world. They're going to remain aware that it exists somewhere, but without really knowing how to make it happen, how to concretely bring into the actual. And other INFJs perhaps are going to do more of that. I think, certainly with Jesus, with Luther King, with Mandela and Gandhi, their visions they brought into the domain of the actual, into the domain of the concrete. Plato brought his vision of the Republic into the domain of the concrete in a way. You could say that Schopenhauer brought his pessimistic vision, which is pessimistic in a profound way, not in just the ordinary sense in which we understand it. It's brought it into the domain of the concrete. And you could apply this to most of these leaders. They had a vision, always accompanied by this coextensive self-questioning, which is they're both connected with NI. You have the vision, you see far ahead, and if you spend some time with yourself, you kind of get to a point where you can start developing that vision and giving it a proper voice. Some people ask me in the comments sometimes, where does it come from that I am articulate and I can express myself well? First of all, thank you very much. I think that there are lots of people who express themselves way better than me, but I have also trained, I've trained because I've tried to give meaning to my vision. My vision is not the vision of someone who wants to make videos about INFJs necessarily. My vision originally is a philosophical vision. It's the vision of open monism, which I made videos about, which is a properly philosophical vision, which in the final draft that I will seek to publish will be quite practical and will be about a real proper way of life. So it's a vision of a way of life and a vision of, a promotion of happiness from a new perspective. And that really animates my life. And I think that's where I draw my confidence from. It's where I draw my assertiveness from. Because I can sort of see the behavior in people versus that kind of framework that I've developed and that I sort of judge myself by as well, So nobody is going to take that from me. And so I derive a lot of satisfaction, but also self-worth and assertiveness from the fact that I gave myself the opportunity of defining my vision, giving it body. Is still a work in progress. And I think for any INFJ, the articulation and distillation of the vision is something that remains a work in progress. Nowhere never is an INFJ more fulfilled than when they get to, via FE, express it, make it universal to the extent that that's possible. Of course, that's going to involve, like I would say, a certain form of resentment on the part of other people. There's always going to be people who are not happy with the visionary assertiveness of an INFJ who is willing to live in complete symbiosis with themselves. Even though it is hard to bring about an NI vision, it's very hard to articulate. We know that it requires a lot of practice. I think an NI vision is, to a certain extent, unique to each individual NI dominant person. So it's difficult in itself. It's difficult then to share it with other people, and it's difficult then to face potential criticism from people who. There are some people who will not understand it. There's people who will understand it, and then there's people who will understand it, but be resentful, and they will see that the INFJ, perhaps unlike a T-type, like an INTJ or an ENTJ, or an INTP or an ISTP or whatever, are going to be easily, hurt by conflict averse, and perhaps sometimes will be willing to sacrifice on the development of their unique vision, to avoid critique, to avoid unfair critique. I would say in certain cases, think about it. How many people that have made you feel bad are worthier than you? Like, how many of them are less worthy than you are? Not in themselves, because I really believe, like Kant, that every human has absolute and irreducible self-worth, but by looking at the spectrum of a person's actions, just look at the spectrum of a person's actions. What have they done? What have they accomplished? And compare it with what you do, and ask yourself, why be upset by this person who's basically done nothing most of the time except be hurtful to others? And you see that that's where this assertiveness, the vision, the assertiveness and its expression can start flirting a little bit with what my brother defined as a form of ego. And I think maybe it is a form of ego, a form of healthy ego. And then that's the other question, Is it wrong for an INFJ to have an ego and to not be ashamed of saying, yes, I have an ego, it's healthy, it's realistic about its limitations, but I must bring it to fruition, I must make it public in a way if I also want to make a positive change in the life of other people, And I think the self-worth of an INFJ and the assertiveness of an INFJ is going to be fed by this idea that it is by being stronger in ourselves and being more assertive in ourselves that we will also accomplish more change in the lives of other people that we want to help in the first place. And that therefore, if you want to make the most change in response to the empathic feeling that you feel for others, you need to be assertive. And to not be assertive is almost like it's a bit of a crutch. It's a resource. It's a resort that is for us easier, is not painful, and is agreeable, but makes us a little bit unhappy, I think, at the end of the day, because we always wish we were more assertive, but also potentially makes the others that we can help at a grander scale if we were more assertive, less happy than they could otherwise be. And I think that taking this all together can provide a template for a model of INFJ blameless assertiveness of self. And I'm definitely not the pinnacle of this. I'm only on my way there, but I'm definitely confident that this is a destiny for the INFJ, and that's where an INFJ type should head, because what they have to share is too precious to be kept for oneself. So to assert it is always worth it. All right, that was my little monologue on assertiveness and the INFJ. Hope you liked it, guys. I will be seeing you soon. Take care.